So Israel has been long known for its abilities in gaming, but usually that was referred to gambling and online casinos. In the last few years, we've seen quite a few big success stories that show that Israeli companies can make big classic gaming, hardcore gaming, and even social gaming. We wanted to better understand the grounds of the gaming industry in Israel and to understand if the next Electronic Arts, or Rovio for that matter, can start its way from the startup nation. To answer these questions and more, we've brought a highly extinguished panel. I would like to invite on stage our moderator for this panel, one of the leading gaming correspondents in the world, and the editor for Venturebeat's gaming section, Dean Takahashi. Joining Dean at this panel, Leonard Frankel, head of business development at Plarium, another Israeli gaming success. Sagi Schliesser, co-founder and CEO of TabTale, an Israeli gaming studio that is mentioned in one breath with giants like Rovio and King, which also presented, by the way, 2 years ago at Geektime. And Gigi Levy, a leading Israeli angel investor who is considered by many as the oracle of gaming in Israel.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves a little better so you can understand where they're coming from. So, all right.
Oh, it's by beauty, no?
You're calling me old? Hi, I'm Gigi Levy. I'm an investor in various companies for quite a few years now. Games have always been one of my favorite areas. I've invested in more than 12 game studios over the years. The famous ones that you may know is Plarium and Playtika, but also quite a few more in Israel and abroad. It's always been one of my favorite areas, if not only to be able to sit at home, play a game, and then when my wife asks me why, I say I'm working. You can't do that with cloud companies. So it's always been the case. It's one of my favorite areas, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Leonard Frankel. I run the business development at Plarium. So, like Gigi said, we're very happy to have him on board. Plarium is the largest hardcore game developer on Facebook. So hardcore means games that are less simple, more complex, not casual. Plarium is an Israeli company with headquarters here. We have about 1,000 employees now. My job in the company is overseeing M&A activities, investing in acquiring smaller studios, licensing deals for TV shows and films from Hollywood studios, and then everything Asia, which we hope to achieve in the near future.
Hi, nice to see you all, or not see you all. My name is Sagi Schliesser. I'm CEO and one of the co-founders from TabTale. Kids gaming studio originally with 800 million downloads and nice growing population of kids playing month over month and growing with our games. Recently launched 2 years ago Crazy Labs, which is our brand for kind of mid-core games and simulation. And happy to be here.
So I've been covering the game industry for 19 years now, and I've never had to travel that much to do that job. And now I've actually been to at least a half dozen countries this year, and I feel like I'm sort of barely keeping up, I guess. And so that tells you just how global the game industry has become, especially as mobile has become the dominant form of gaming. And I'm curious about learning more about Israel here. I'm very impressed with what is here. But if you have a certain kind of talent that grew up here in Israel, and then you start a certain kind of company, in games, you wind up with a lot of similar companies, like social casino games, ad tech, kids games. In what ways is that a strength, and in what ways is that a vulnerability as well?
I think that when you look at any field of investment, eventually these are usually there's the first pioneers of any journey, of any industry. And then around these pioneers, you start getting companies that are growing around it. So if you look at bigger picture, not game genres, the reason why there's so much security in Israel is one of the reasons that we have a great company called Checkpoint, out of which comes many startups. Similarly, Amdocs with enterprise software and so on. And so what happened in the games industry in Israel is that we've had initial pioneers trying to go in all directions. There were attempts at AAA, there were attempts at core, there were attempts at casual. And then basically there were 3 areas that caught up. One of them was kids games. Another one was core games or mid-core plus games around MMO strategy. And the third one is social casino. And what we're seeing today, when you look at when you map the startups and you see many companies in these 3 areas, it's simply because these were the 3 pioneers, and you've got 3 large companies that, where people see their success, they work there, they go out, they start their own thing. When I look into the future of Israel, I think that when it comes to casual, mobile, mid-core, Israel's very well positioned. So I see today people working on a variety of new concepts for new genres where Israel could excel on. The one thing I don't see, and it's a pity, but I can also understand why that's the case, is we don't see any work on anything which is AAA. So Plarium, for example, does AAA MMO strategy, but Plarium would not go into consoles, would not go into PCs. And so from that perspective, it's a vulnerability because many of the concepts that made these mid-tier, kind of mid-core companies successful come from AAA principles. And so by not having it, that's a bit of an issue. We in Plarium, we solve it by, we often bring game developers from the top companies around the world to work with us. So whenever we feel that we're going after a new genre and this genre only existed on console, we'd bring top game designers from this to work for the company and basically help us. But for small companies, it's a problem. So that is one weakness that I see.
Right, so when I joined Plarium 4 years ago, the game industry in Israel was quite smaller. All of the major companies that are strong today in Israel existed back there, but you barely saw any indies, and it was definitely harder for indies to raise money to build games. And routinely, I think, even before games, Israelis had a lot of capacity and skills to create casino games, casino-related games, and this translated to social casino games, which are basically casino games for not for real money. And you see a lot of skill coming from Israel. A lot of Israeli companies were sold last year or in the last 12 months to foreign companies, social casino companies mostly. But what you do see now is that with the focus on mobile games, which are somewhat cheaper to produce, I think, than what browser games were a few years ago. There is more capacity to create other games, and you see promising companies like Jelly Button rising up, and there's Moon Active Studio, and there are other companies coming up. I think we're going to see more of them in the future.
Well, I'll try and add something interesting, but it's quite hard with the answers. But much like when we started TabTale in 2010, you would scrape for game designers or anything related to real gaming. You could get amazing developers because obviously they did other things, but everything else was really hard. This is why I think also a lot of the growing companies, the gaming growing companies in Israel are structured globally, so you can get talents and get talent and information and IP flowing back and forth from Israel, technology, and from different countries having the game design and other things. And I think right now, obviously, when there is knowledge around certain areas, then these are the places where it's going to flourish, and I think it's going to take time. AAA, for instance, takes a lot of money. You can lose a lot of money in AAA or make a lot of money. I think it also has to do with backing. In order to produce a AAA title, someone needs to believe in that. I still remember first time I went to look for funding, and we were told in many times that, yeah, you have great technology, but you're doing content, and content is not something Israeli VCs will invest in. And I think that's one of the problems. We're a startup nation for technology, and gaming is a lot about content. And this is interesting to see how we're going to evolve there.
So, I know you have 70 VC firms here in Israel, and that's pretty amazing for any one region. But so many of them won't invest in games, right? Is gaming sort of starving because it doesn't have the right access to capital?
Well, Well, that's you, Gigi.
Yeah.
Well, the answer is practically yes. I think that when you look at the number of the top VCs, so let's say there's 70, but there's probably like 20 that write checks of $3 to $5 million, right? Of these 20, I can think of only 3 that made games investments in the last 3-4 years. And so, and even they made 1 each. So the reality is that it's relatively easy today to raise that first 1 million if you're good, if you're coming with the right concept, and if you're coming with something playable, if you're coming with a team that's proven. But then afterward, if you didn't really hit crazy numbers at the beginning, which we know is becoming tougher and tougher because the market's becoming tougher, then to go and raise the $4 or $5 million to prove yourself has become almost impossible for games in Israel. That's one of the biggest problems right now. And then many of these companies that would have been very well funded in the United States because their initial traction is good, they could get the 5, then they could get the 15. They don't get it in Israel, which means that they're scrapping with another $500,000, another million, another million, which means that they never get a real chance of going out in the market and proving their game. And so, right now, for any young startup trying to go into games, this is the biggest risk out there, more than anything else.
So we kind of have like this boom going on for games where games are, say, expanding worldwide like never before. There's new opportunities in VR and AR, so many platforms to build for. But game investments, like in the first 9 months of this year, are down 35% from a year ago. So it seems like there's a big disconnect.
Well, there's a big disconnect, and you see it in the private market, you see it in the public markets. I mean, it's kind of funny that at the end of the day, games companies end up being traded, on multiples of movie companies, despite the fact that both of them have content, but the games company also have a lot of technological skill and technological assets, but still many of the investors do not understand them, and so I hope that with time we'll have more companies that will go public and show that they can sustain their position over time and become good investments. But for the time being, the public markets are pretty afraid of games companies, sadly.
So let's ask a non-Gigi question here then. So where do you, other two, see your room to maneuver in the future? What gets you excited about what you can do with, where you guys are headed?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, just to reference to what you said, Gigi, there is a lot of growth still happening in Asia. So Asian game companies are still growing, even in the public markets. I do agree completely about the Western markets. And at Plarium, we do look up to Asian companies. They were doing free-to-play long before we dreamed about it. And we're trying to learn from them as much as we can. We are also trying to battle. There is a challenge of discovery for games because you need to do user acquisition. You need to pay for ads to bring players to your games. There's not a lot of viral growth in games these days, and the cost of bringing users is getting more and more expensive. So we're looking into battling this challenge through licensing deals, as I said before, which is something that's very interesting for us in the near future. And lastly, we look into new genres that we haven't built expertise in, and we try to build those either internally in-house or source talents, like Gigi said earlier, from abroad, key star talents, game designers and such, to help us.
We actually have 2 lines of business. One which is mature, the kids business. It took us almost 5 years to get to be #1 in what we're doing, and we're the #1 publisher for kids. And there, what we're trying to do is try to build an IP around that. Just being a game publisher is nice, but if you want to really be successful, then you need to try and leverage the success of the games and try and build an IP out of that. So we're doing now an animation series, putting more content because kids don't really care. They're using now many investors and people just said, usually the market goes where the devices are. So if kids are now consuming content on their tablets, whatever, multi-purpose, not multi-purpose iPhones, then they're going to consume their YouTubes and their animation. And if you're going to combine and give them the combined value, then they're going to like to get it from one place and not go to different places. So that's on the kids side, and I think there we can achieve substantial growth. On the Crazy Labs brand, in which we're doing some kind of, again, not the size of Plarium, smaller, but still towards the mid-core game, and and a big lifestyle simulation game. I think there we are just ramping up. We are now in soft launch with around 4 titles. And we will learn next year on how to master all the elements in order to get to maturity. So there we still have a big uphill battle, but we're confident that we're doing things in a good way. We built really great technology that would enable us to scale up. And that's our hope for success on that area as well.
So do we have like a user acquisition crisis right now, and how should game companies deal with it?
Oh, sorry. So where was I jumping ahead? So we are looking also, aside from the 2 ways I mentioned earlier, we are looking into interesting sources of existing big audiences on mobile platforms that's not very widely available. And we're looking for ways to collaborate with those entities and grow our user base through them. And obviously at Plarium we put a lot of emphasis on growth. We have right now more than 50 people in the company doing user acquisition in full time. This is a very important department and strength that we're constantly trying to grow in the company.
We grew gradually and in the kids market since you cannot, there are regulations, so you cannot really target kids. So we achieved 40 million unique monthly active user, and that just usually does it to get the next game up to the top 10 in around 50 countries. Sometimes we'll do a little bit of user acquisition, but just to improve from number 10 to number 6. Obviously on the mid-core front and the lifestyle simulation, the rising cost of user acquisition and calculating, there are all sorts of new calculation, if it was CPI to LTV and now eCPI. So it's a whole science that is not only complicated, but it's changing every day. So things are changing and you need to keep track of that. And I think gaming as a service, what's going on in Valve and Steam. So we need to find a way. So on the kids front, we are cooperating with the different stores in releasing subscription-based content. And I think we need to find a way to go towards the game as a service model in a kind of better way also on the bigger games. So that would be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that technically the reality is that there's a big problem on customer acquisition. The main reason is that for kind of a couple of years now, the main channel for games customer acquisition on mobile have been Facebook. Reality being that Google have been extremely slow at adapting to this install market. And so right now they're catching up with YouTube ads and with new search install ads, etc. But that did not exist before. And Facebook, that moved everybody to the mobile platform and has close to 1 billion users on the global platform, basically has become the go-to place for game installs. At the beginning that was great because game companies that move quickly like Plarium and others could get installs very cheaply in one place, and at a certain point 80 or 90% of installs on mobile for most companies came from Facebook. But then as more and more companies started getting on top of it, and mostly in the last year as Facebook started onboarding brand and e-commerce companies into in-feed advertising, what happened is that the prices just started going up. So right now the Facebook inventory is more or less fixed. And the inventory, if you guys ever wondered, is around 1 ad per 10 items in your feed. That's the way it's calibrated today. And so the inventory, as long as they don't decide to push more, that's more or less fixed. And the number of advertisers is just growing, and brand advertisers and e-commerce advertisers. The outcome is that CPIs basically grew by more than 120% over the last year. Now we hope it's going to stop. I mean, I'm very involved. Facebook, I sit on the advisory council of Facebook, and so there is hopefully something that's stopping it now. But the reality is that if it's going to go up, that's going to be tougher and tougher for games companies to succeed. That has become now, I think, the biggest challenge, especially to the smaller game companies.
So you mentioned these platform owners, and it sort of makes me think of this analogy of game companies are very big, but everything is sort of relative, and sometimes they seem like pawns on somebody else's chessboard, I guess. And I wonder how much the game companies have to think about that.
Do you feel like pawns, guys?
We're having fun while we're doing it, yeah. But there is a bigger game at scale, and Apple is not in the business of distributing apps, it's in the business of distributing devices. And we are their means of distributing devices. And it comes to the point where we sometimes need to take into consideration what's important, for example, for Apple in a game to get some Apple love, which means free users. So I totally understand what you're saying. There are other platforms on mobile. There's obviously Google Play, and there's Amazon, which is far smaller, but still a valid platform. In Asia, there are other platforms as well, even more. But Apple and Google are the main platforms, and we do have to kind of play by their rules if we want to grow in this market.
Yeah, I think that it's very true. It's a mixture. So on one side, you need to believe in what you're doing and continue and push the features and the content. And I think in many cases, users don't really care about abilities unless you can use them in a way in which it enhances their experience. So, and this is the big challenge. On the one side, the new devices, the new features, sometimes you can use them in a good way. Sometimes you're just saying, okay, let's do something with them somewhere just to try and get that. And I think it really depends. And sometimes you get all sorts of requirements that make sense maybe for utilities, but they want them also to integrate with gaming. So, like any business, you have to dance. You have many flutes that you need to dance by. But at the end, I think that the companies who are successful, they have their own internal beat. So they listen and they do some things, but they have their own kind of truth and vision. And this is what will mostly lead us in our path. So.
It seems to me that gaming is always sort of narrowing down and then spreading out at the same time, I guess. And on the narrowing down front, you know, we had our GamesBeat conference last week, and Gabe Layden, the CEO of Machine Zone, which has the Game of War, the #1 mobile game in the world, he basically said that the pressures of making a global game are becoming so tough that, say, but within a couple years, the best strategy for a game company is to focus on just one game. You don't, for example, see Blizzard making 4 World of Warcrafts and doing it well. So how do you react to this notion that game companies really have to think about that future of focusing?
Well, I'll start with this one. So games are also data heavy, right? There's a lot of actions players can take in a game. And for us in Plarium, we take it very seriously. We analyze a lot of data points because we want to create this tailored experience and deliver a game that is almost personally suited to the player who's interacting with us. When we launch a game, we see it as a game that we will be servicing for the next 10 or more years. So you can totally understand what you're referring to when you're saying one game. Our first strategy game that we launched, Total Domination, was launched almost 5 years ago, nearly 5 years ago. It's still generating significant revenues for the companies, and we see it going on for many more years. Even so, we're looking for the next successful game that we can grow, and we believe that our future will lie also in finding another new experience, innovative experiences that players, we can gain loyal players to join us and stick with us for long years.
Well, our approach is quite different than that. I mean, we believe in consistency, in doing, not trying to hit only the one big hit, but trying to go consistently at our targets. This is what we've done on the kids area, which was simpler because the pieces of content there are smaller, but also when we're doing now the mid-core types, we are building a platform, and our vision is on doing several of these. We think of things, you know, the difference between these AAA movies and TV series. So TV series are also very successful. You get TV stars that are making by the series. So you make 22 chapters. It can also be very successful, and we're taking the TV series approach. We believe that for us, for the kind of technology abilities that we have and our approach in how to make games, this is the right approach. But I totally understand that for companies with the DNA of making something huge and pulling a lot of content, pushing a lot of content into that, that would be the right approach. So I think there are different approaches here, and it depends on which side of the game you're on.
I think, I spoke to Gabe and to Ilka at Supercell and others about that. It's very simple. It's once you become number one or the top three, it's very easy to have a strategy of focusing just on one game, right? So if you're number one and number one revenues are around, just that you understand, they're around 10 times the revenues of number five. Okay, it's not, it's non-linear at the end. It goes like that. If you've got a chance with one of your games to be number one, you should definitely focus just on that, because that's going to build you a company like King or Supercell, etc. The problem is that there can only be, number 1, 2, 3 have not changed in the games industry for the last 3 years. And so, they switch places, but they haven't changed for 3 years. The meaning is that there are 3 companies that have been holding these 3 places for years now, and probably a few more years to come. The meaning, because they're spending so much money now to make this even bigger. The meaning is that all the rest of us need to live in a world where we can't be anytime soon number 1, 2, or 3. And in that world, a single SKU, a single game, is not a valid strategy, because it's going to be very, very difficult. You cannot aim to be top 5. You can aim to be top 25. This is what we do in Plarium, in Playtika. We aim for games to be top 25, which is great. You can build $1 billion business off it relatively easily if you know how to do that. But if you're trying to just aim with one game to be number 1 or 2, that's going to be incredibly difficult or impossible.
And if we have a chance to spread out, what do you guys think of virtual reality and augmented reality?
Well, I'm one of the hugest fans of VR and AR. I play a lot with the latest gear from HTC and Oculus. I think that's going to change the world completely. In general, by the way, I think there was a bit of a grim panel for the wrong reasons, meaning that we spoke about rising CPIs and how complex it is and how difficult. There's no other industry which is as amazing as this industry. When you start building a game, if you got it right, if you've got the art right, and it's not the art that created, just the magic of building something fun, there's nothing else in the world that grows as fast. There's nothing else in the world that gets you customer love as much as that. So, it's a great industry to be in. In that great industry, the next platform leap is probably going to be VR. I've played a few VR games, and it's totally immersive. There's nothing that, you can't stop playing it. If I had enough of them now, I think that's what I'd be doing half my day, like when I was 16 or 14 or something.
I agree, VR is very immersive. I just, personally, whenever I put on these goggles, they make me a bit nausea. When I look at the history of games, so you had very physical platforms like the Wii, Nintendo Wii, and PlayStation Move. And they had their audience, but they never made it into the mainstream. Also, games where you have to tilt the device to play, right? There is a challenge, an obstacle, because I think gamers are lazy in their play style. They don't want to move that much, right? And you have something big on your head, and you gotta walk around. So it's a great experience, but also to paraphrase, you can look at IMAX, right? That's a great cinematic experience. Do we watch most of our movies on it? I don't think so. So I think it's going to be a very valid platform, but I don't think it will make it to the mainstream.
I'll be brief because I see we ran out of time, but VR is fun, but I'll have to see it to believe it. So I think someone will crack it, but I just don't, I cannot do it. So I hope that someone will show me the way, and then we'll follow.
I thought we were going to end on a happy note with that question, but you guys are pretty grim throughout the whole thing here. So, thank you.
Thank you.